The capital city is going through some major changes, namely the mayor. Ahead of inauguration, both Mayor Luke Bronin and Hartford's next mayor, Bronin will be here with us. A very special episode of The Real Story this morning as we talk about Hartford's past, present, and future with its leaders. Good morning and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Mayor Luke Bronin has been at the helm of the city of Hartford for 2 terms, inaugurated for the first time back in 2016. He's seen the city through near bankruptcy, a pandemic, countless protests, and so much more. After nearly a decade of leading Connecticut's state capitol, he says he's not leaving Hartford, but he is stepping aside at City Hall. But first, he's joining us here on The Real Story to talk about it all. Mayor Bronin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Emma. Good to see you.
So we just had that video up of you being sworn in for the first time back in 2016. You know, what's it like looking back at that time now? Is there anything you would tell Luke Bronin of 8 years ago today?
Well, first of all, it feels like about 20 years ago, not 8. I was looking at pictures the other day of my kids, and you know, my kids are 14, 12, and 10 now, and Sarah and I were looking at pictures of that time and that night, and they're just so little, and it's, you know, the bulk of their lives that been doing this work. I don't know if I have any words of wisdom, you know, other than, you know, buckle up. There's not going to be a boring day in the 8 years to come.
Yeah, absolutely, and you were certainly handed a bit of a mess when you took office for the first time. You've said, despite not being officially bankrupt, the city of Hartford was essentially bankrupt. But before leaving office, you've been able to move Hartford's financial oversight in a really good direction. So from your perspective, what did that progress take, and how does it feel to be leaving the city now in this position?
I think first and foremost, it took honesty about how bad it was. Right. You know, I think the fiscal crisis we faced was rooted in a lot of pretty deep structural challenges. What I fault my predecessors for is not for causing the problem. It's for not shining a big bright light on it and saying we can't responsibly solve this with the tools that we've got right now. And instead, what I think some of the prior administrations did was just try to buy a little bit of time and try to piece it together from year to year. And what that did was make it worse. You know, debt restructurings that created a mountain of debt that we were walking into. So I think first and foremost was just to be really transparent with the people of Hartford about how ugly it was and how much sacrifice it was going to take. And we asked a lot from our community because we made some really deep and difficult cuts. We asked a lot from our unions, and they came to the table and gave a lot, and I'm deeply grateful. Our companies, you know, 3 big corporations made a significant financial contribution. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the state of Connecticut partnered with us in a really important way. And all of that together gave us the chance to lay a foundation that would allow us to build for the long term rather than just prolonging a crisis.
Right. And let's talk more about some of those loose ends. You know, you told us, I think when we spoke a couple months ago over the summer, that you still had a couple things you wanted to tie up. And I know you've been telling us you're kind of working up until the very last second here. So what do you think needed to be accomplished since you announced you weren't running for re-election? And is there anything you feel you've gotten done before walking away?
Look, we've gotten a lot of things done. There are a lot of things I wish we could have gotten done. There's a whole lot for the next team to do. I think that's probably always the case. But we really are running through the finish line. You know, today I signed the agreements for the next phase of the development across from the ballpark. We're hoping to have another set of agreements signed in the coming days on a development that the city's been working on for a long, long time. You know, we are continuing to push critical economic development projects forward, but also just to make sure that we are handing over the keys to a city that is as strong as possible and do as much as possible to make sure that we're working hand in hand with the new administration so that they can hit the ground running and continue the work.
You talked about those ballpark developments. I know that's been a big process with definitely some ups and downs, but revitalization as a whole has been a really big goal for you. I know for me personally, just in the past nearly 2 years living here, I've seen so much more open up in downtown Hartford. And, you know, to keep Hartford functioning and surviving, you relied on a lot of businesses taking that chance of coming in and opening up in Hartford. You've been to countless ribbon cuttings for things opening. What would you say has worked in terms of bringing businesses here into the city of Hartford?
Well, look, I mean, I think we were making some really good progress and had some really good momentum coming into 2020. And there's no question that the pandemic took some wind out of our sails and slowed that down. But I do think that for all the challenges, and we still feel the effects of COVID, you know, a lot fewer people in offices, but for all those challenges, I do think that there is a different level of confidence in the city and a sense that the path ahead is not necessarily easy, but that we're headed in the right direction, and that certainly helps when you're pitching the city and selling the city and encouraging people to invest, whether it's invest in a new coffee shop or whether it's, you know, invest in a new large-scale residential development. And we have really focused hard on trying to bring that capital in, and to do it in a lot of times in a public-private partnership. And it's not just in the downtown, it's throughout the city. You know, we got a lot of work going on Albany Avenue, in Parkville, some important projects that we were able to move forward just in the past couple of weeks in the Northeast neighborhood. So we're really working hard on all of those fronts.
And so while you knew you needed to focus on development, obviously, and as well as bringing the whole state back to recognizing Hartford as the capital city, you also came into office really wanting to prioritize the Hartford community and on all of its neighborhoods as a whole and connecting them. You've gotten to do a lot of things from land bank to home ownership to Love Your Block grants, but a lot of people would say they can't really be proud of Hartford until there's less violence. That's been a really big issue that's been plaguing the city. What do you think needs to happen when it comes to reducing violence in Hartford?
Look, I mean, let me just say the hardest part of the last 8 years by far is sitting in living rooms with, you know, a mother or father or grandparents who have lost a child or a grandchild to gun violence. And when that happens, that pain ripples through the community, and it's devastating. And what I can say is I think we're doing more than the city has ever done to try to combat that and try to make sure that our community is safe as possible. And that includes giving our law enforcement the tools and the support that they need. It means advocating for some changes on the state level, because we saw a lot of times you had people who had repeatedly been involved in inflicting violence on our community but weren't facing consequences, and we made some important changes there. And it's also meant a real focus on partnerships with community organizations and community partners to get at the prevention and to get at some of the root causes. You know, we've done more than I think the city's ever done to build things like hospital-based violence intervention to help some of that prevention work. Individualized, you know, person by person support to help people get on a different path. It's really hard to draw a straight line from any particular initiative to numbers.
Sure.
And I always am really reluctant to talk about numbers one way or another. We saw some really tough years after the pandemic, like a lot of cities did. A lot of cities saw a really significant spike in gun violence, and we did too. And we've seen violence change in that a lot of it is very, very personal. You know, this is not random violence for the most part. It's between people who know each other very well. And we've still seen homicides too high. But to date this year, we have one of the lowest numbers of shooting incidents that we've had in 2 decades.
Wow.
Again, I can't tell you that's because of what we're doing, but I do hope that if we continue doing what we're doing, that we'll continue to see those numbers come down.
And is there anything else that you are looking to do either? And obviously you said continuing what's already been done. Is there anything else still new? Any new initiatives you'd like to be introduced?
You know, I think when you talk about combating violence, obviously I think there's a lot of room for federal action. You know, the reality is there are too many guns out there, they're too accessible. One of the reasons we see fatalities remain high is because things like Glock switches, which turn semi-automatics into automatics, or high-capacity magazines, are just too easy to get, and that makes a difference on our streets. So I think we've got to keep pushing for that. I also think things that we've built, which aren't specifically about violence prevention, but are still an important piece of the puzzle, need to be continued. And that's things like our reentry welcome center.
Right.
So people are coming back, having made a mistake, served their time, coming back into the community, have a better chance of building a different life. Things like our youth service corps, which creates opportunities for thousands of young kids of young people in our city to get their first real job experience. All of that matters, but I will just say, what I think is most important is that those things that we've tried to build get sustained, and that's not easy. It means it takes funding, it takes efforts to keep getting philanthropic support, even as things like the American Rescue Plan dry up.
And I think your partnership with this state, obviously, Hartford as the capital city is right, has the state legislature and the state capitol right in the heart of it. And I know partnership with the whole state has been a big priority for you. But you mentioned the youth service corps. I know really a lot of times the biggest smiles from you are when you're in schools with the kids, working with local children here. As a family man here in Hartford and as the mayor, what do you see in schools right now? What's improved over the last 8 years and what still needs to be focused on?
Let me just say, I think our young people are still very much recovering and healing from the disruption of the pandemic. I'm really proud that our schools offered an in-person school option that first fall of the pandemic. That option was there for families and kids to be in school as of the fall of 2020. But it was still a profound disruption. And I think a lot of kids fell behind, and I think a lot of kids are still struggling. And we've seen in our community and in lots of communities increasing challenges that come from mental health challenges, isolation, the pressures of social media. All of that's really profound. And where that worries me the most is in attendance numbers. If there were one thing when it comes to our kids that I'm most worried about, it's how many kids are not fully engaged in school. And I think that's something at a state level and at a city level we need to really, really work on.
Okay, and before we run out of time here, what's your message for Hartford, for the residents, those who elected you and even those who didn't vote for you either time? What do you hope they know as we look to see the mayoral seat switch in just a couple weeks?
Look, what I would say to residents and to those who elected me, I'm really grateful. I have loved this job. I love this city. I'm going to miss this job, but it's time to pass the baton and let the next team lead. I hope that when our community looks back at the 8 years, they see a city hall, city government that didn't always get everything right, but I hope they see city government that was always trying to do the right things for the right reasons, and that they have a stronger faith in their city.
Well, Mayor Bronin, we always love having you on. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all the time we have with you, but Real Story is not over. Don't go anywhere because we're bringing on Hartford's next mayor. Next, as the capital city's leadership changes, we're talking to Mayor-elect Bronin about where he hopes Hartford's headed next. Stay with us.